We welcome all of you to this evening with Sraddhalu, and we begin with Anmol's question.
No, I just have, if somehow it can be improved.
Okay.
Like, today is Swami Vivekananda's birthday. So I was searching about him in the agenda, what Mother has said now. So she said that he was a vibhuti of Shiva, the complete descent didn't take place. And then she said, when the earth is ready for supramental life, Shiva will come. This is a sentence in the agenda. And then I read the All India magazine of this month, the last page, speaks about, it's on 14th March 1970, and she says that it has taken this new consciousness 14 months to win this great victory. And she says that this wholly concrete and absolute realization that one could have only when going out of matter. It is sure and certain that we will have it right here. So what I wanted to ask you was that, does this statement of the Mother that everything is now possible in matter, can we take it to mean that the earth is ready for the supramental life and that now Shiva can come?
The incarnation of Shiva in this context.
It's being recorded, yes.
The incarnation of Shiva that the Mother spoke of, she said many of the gods are not prepared to incarnate in a human body because it involves too much of a dilution or a loss of their divinity in the dullness of matter and in the ignorance that the human mind offers. And they are not willing to lose that purity and illumination for this incarnation.
And power.
And power, of course. But a supramental body, now this is a different story. The body where the matter itself has been transformed and supramentalized would be able to incarnate with zero ignorance, able to inhabit the full power of infinity, which includes power of knowledge and spiritual power, and everything else which belongs right now only in that domain. It would be able to incarnate it in a living body of form. At that point, the gods will enter the physical manifestation and participate directly. Until then, what they do, and this is actually happening now, and it has been happening for thousands of years, they put out either partial incarnations, vibhutis, or more important, see, the vibhuti concept itself need not be a separate person. It can be a power put into an existing evolving human being, partially identifying and supporting that person in the evolution, working through him, and that deity is growing through that access in the human life, but is not fully involved in it. And this is happening all the time.
And she said almost all those beings will manifest, they are waiting for that moment.
Yes.
They're waiting for that.
Yes, but when you are speaking of a being which is cosmic, waiting, 1,000,000 years is fine. Waiting. Right?
No, but like she also gave this figure of 300 years, that in 300 years.
That's different. That's not from their viewpoint. That's from our viewpoint. 300 years is what would take a minimum for this physical transformation to take place.
But I'm sorry to interrupt you, but like the statement which she made, that she said that everything is now possible in matter, doesn't it mean that the earth is ready for the supramental life?
Possible is different from ready for. It's possible to do it because now the conditions are there. Earth, nature, etc. still have to collaborate. There's still resistance, opposition even. So her view was...
It's more ready instead of totally ready.
Well, it's capable of it, but is it willing? Not yet willing. For that, the Mother spoke of the first supramental being having to manifest the aspect of power first instead of love and knowledge, because it would need to defend itself from human beings. What does that mean? Even at that point, humanity is scared of and wants to destroy. What comes? So, readiness, no. Capacity, yes. Potentially.
Krishna's complete descent did take place. How was that?
Krishna's overmental consciousness entered Sri Aurobindo's physical body. Okay?
It didn't say Krishna's overmental consciousness entered, it said Krishna entered.
Yes.
The full descent. And she makes a difference between the complete descent and just a vibhuti. That's why I'm trying to confirm.
But
that was it even Krishna's complete descent, or he also held something back?
Krishna's consciousness, okay, and Krishna as the highest personality of the divine, which you name Krishna, and the incarnation, which was Krishna, okay. The highest personality of the divine is not overmental.
Yeah, that's transcendent.
Okay. But the incarnation that was Krishna, and when we speak of Krishna as consciousness, that relates to the overmental consciousness that he embodied,
Yes.
and the principle of Ananda that he brought with it. So, in Sri Aurobindo's body, what took place in his sadhana, remember, he was bringing down the supramental consciousness. First, it's a top-down transformation. His mind was becoming more and more divinized, not only illuminated, not only intuitivized, not only overmentalized, but supramentalized, at which point it is capable of the infinity of the supramental knowledge and power in the mind. But the vehicle of his vitality and physical body are still unable to contain the full impact of it. So those next step, the vitality becomes transformed, and then before the physical can be transformed, there is the subtle physical, which is the most elastic, plastic part of the physical. It is there that the greatest reception takes place. So in Sri Aurobindo's consciousness, as in Mother's, the transformation by the supramental consciousness descending had gone all the way to the subtle physical. Before it can enter the physical body, there has to be in the physical matter and the body an ability to contain the infinite, which it doesn't have. It will shatter.
Yeah.
As a preparatory phase of that infinite capacity is the overmental consciousness settling. Let's say before that even the intuitive consciousness has to settle, before truth can touch it. And then the overmental would open it to an infinity, but not the whole of the infinity, but an aspect of the infinity. So Sri Aurobindo was working on this from 1926 onwards, but 1926 is the decisive point where the overmental settled in the physical body. As a result, now it prepares the way for the supramental to enter the physical body. Meanwhile, it's already got to other levels, to various degrees. Okay, this is how you have to understand it. That last part, had it been completed, would have rendered the physical body tissue itself now transformed in a supramental consciousness. What it had been done already was it had been transformed to a degree into the overmental consciousness, but at that point it still has limitations of matter, but it has elasticity and plasticity and ability to reflect the higher ranges directly.
There's even a record of yoga entry of December 1926 where he writes about the descent of the 7 sons of the supermind. So it's just after the overmental siddhis.
Mother
Yes.
discovers the mind of the cells. Can
Yes.
we talk about that?
Sure. Yes.
So, for me, I've read that book twice or 3 times.
Yes.
It's so extraordinary that the minds were the cells were actually accepting this force. The cells themselves,
Yes. Each as an individual almost.
as an individual.
Yes. Yes. It is quite remarkable. What the mother has done in the physical consciousness has no precedent in history. And I will say history of the universe, not just of the earth. Remember, we have beings all over across the universe, on every planet. Some of them even spiritual beings, some of them highly evolved spiritual beings, far more than human beings on earth. But the specific act of bringing the supramental consciousness into the physical has not been done anywhere in the universe. This is the interesting point. And to that extent, Sri Aurobindo and the mother were pioneers for this step, which with its success here on earth would have universal ramifications for all beings. There are, just as on earth, there were beings who had reached the supramental consciousness in their higher ranges, leaving the lower part untouched. So there are actually beings across the universe who embody that even today, in other planets or other galaxies. But to have brought it into the physical material substance of the body and then to make the body supramentally transformed, that has not been done, and the work of doing it was pioneered by Sri Aurobindo and the mother. In Sri Aurobindo's own body, the aspect of the mind of light was what he focused upon in his last few at least years, but in his own body he could take it to a degree that it was already extraordinary. I will share an aspect of this. When he entered into that seclusion of the sadhana, the he described it like this. He said, I have held the supramental by the tail, so to say, and I'm pulling it down. That's a way of describing it. But what does it mean? It means in a part of his consciousness he had identified with it, and then he was imprinting it all the way down into the physical body. So the thing was happening on his body in a certain way, to the degree that to meet him in the physical space with your physical body would be overwhelming to people. And so the mother had given strict instructions that for the people who were living across the street from Sri Aurobindo's room, they were told not to look even inside his room, and other people, of course, in the working upstairs were not allowed to go into that space. Only 1 or 2 attendants were given that access, and even for them it was difficult to be in that presence. And when Sri Aurobindo was asked to add an extra darshan in April, he said, you don't realize how much it delays the work, because every time that he had to meet people for the darshan, he had to reduce the power to make it accessible to people. And with that reduced power, people entering that atmosphere used to be overwhelmed. And in the first darshan, which was after the Supramental Manifestation, in 1960, 29th February, the mother was embodying that in her consciousness now, because it was an active power in evolution. She could hold it in the physical body, and she had given strict instructions, nobody is to touch her. So she was giving the blessings, the card was there and she would give it, and you held the other end of the card, and that was it. No contact with her, no pranam, no touch physically. And one foolish sadhak grabbed her hand, and instantly he fell down unconscious. And of course she had to diminish the power subsequently because of the misuse. Who else might do it? So she had to diminish. But it is just to show you what happens when a little bit of that power is even entering the physical consciousness. Sri Aurobindo said even a drop of the undiluted ananda would shatter the body, because it cannot contain that. There was even the danger initially, and this is discussed by Sri Aurobindo in the early stages of his sadhana, before the ashram was formed, that if the supramental consciousness was brought down prematurely, the physical earth might break. And what does that mean? If you bring it straight into matter, the body of earth would shatter, as would your physical body.
Yes.
And the only way to make it receptive was to create a space on the physical earth, consisting obviously of human beings, in whom the receptivity might be greater. So a space and a collectivity, a community, in which the consciousness was sufficiently purified and raised that it could enter first of all in relation with that power, and then receive and contain it, however partially, which would then make it possible for the earth consciousness to be able to support. And it is for this reason that the ashram was created.
But it never really happened. Mother said at one point, we were just reading today on gossip, she said it has gotten to such a point that it's impossible now. And I think it was Sir Akbar who told Mother that Mridu was the second mother. He said, be careful. And Mother said she gossips about everything. And it's the most dangerous thing in the ashram, she says.
Yes. I don't think that culture has changed. If anything, it gets worse. But the whole thing was, in the initial stages, everybody coming to the ashram was selected. And the degree of concentration on the purpose was so great, the exclusivity of the focus was so great, even you were not allowed to receive a gift from somebody from outside. Even a letter coming had to pass through that filter. And it may seem to the normal mindset something almost oppressive.
Big brother.
Yes, like you're still living in a prison house or something.
Yeah.
But it was to protect the space created from the invasion of the world. Precisely to create that barrier. It was not a rigid barrier, it was porous barrier, because Sri Aurobindo wanted an exchange with the world. It was not isolation, but it was controlled so that the invasions would not corrupt what was being prepared. Now, in the first stage of this, 1926 onwards, the preparation for it was, in the collectivity, remember, you have to be able to contain what comes. Who can contain? None of the sadhaks could. Only Sri Aurobindo and the mother. But to have a representative humanity contain it, they had to be lifted to a certain level. And so the mother did that for you. The requirement was that you remain open to her, and she was doing the sadhana inside you. And then she did something extraordinary. And again, there are elements of which you will find in many of the mystical traditions of the world. But the degree to which this went was exceptional. What she did was, there was a group of, I believe it was 24 sadhaks, and there would be a meditation, and it was called the soup ceremony. Mother would have the soup prepared, she would place her hand over the soup pot like this, bring down that consciousness. Now obviously in the context we will say it was something of the supramental, or a power of the overmental at least. And then one by one each sadhak would come, she would take a bowl of soup, herself first take a sip, and then give it to the sadhak to drink. On each one of the sadhaks, it was a different aspect that was being invoked. She would embody a certain power of the divine, what we will call today the gods, the Vedic deities. Now these are cosmic powers, okay? She would embody that power, connect it with the soup bowl, the soup content, and then give it. And into each one she was now fixing this consciousness of one of the gods. The result was in a very short time, and it took, the whole construction took about 2 years, she said. In those 2 years, all these sadhaks were having extraordinary experiences of the overmental consciousness. They were experiencing the powers associated with those deities, the consciousness associated with those deities, and they had done nothing. They had done nothing to deserve it. It was all created, built by her in their consciousness. And imagine the demand of the purity required. Okay? And they held it. In her consciousness, she held it. Some of them were going a little unstable. Some of them began to behave in weird ways. And we had an interview with one of the disciples who actually went through that whole process. And he died soon after. And we asked him to narrate what was happening. There were others who were not in that process, but who came just after and who heard what was happening. And there was one example of a sadhak who would, during the meditation, he would get up suddenly and go around and hit people and say, oh, this is not clear, and whack him. And so people would get a little worried, and mother said, no, just leave him. What it was, we don't know. Maybe there was an instability within him, but she was working on it. She had the whole thing in her control. She had built up this web, so to say. The group, the collectivity, embodied all the major aspects of the divine, of the overmental aspects of the divine, and the whole thing was held like this, like a container, into which the supramental could come straight. Okay? Now, this description of what it meant, you will find alluded to by Sri Aurobindo in the evening talks of that period, 1927-28, where in one of the discussions, he says, somebody asks, what is required for the supermind to come into matter? And he says it would require for all the overmental gods to first come into matter and provide the supporting base for the supermind to descend. And this is what the mother had created in this group. Then with that ready, she goes to Sri Aurobindo. Now all this is happening, remember, in Sri Aurobindo's direct support. She is only executing what he is willing. They were one consciousness. And then she goes to Sri Aurobindo and shows this. Here is what I have created. And Sri Aurobindo says, no, this is not what we want. Now, it's not that they didn't know. It's that they had to take it as far as it could go, and then they saw that it had a limitation.
He says to her that you'll become very famous, you'll begin a new religion, you'll be known all over the world.
Yes. He said it may even create the greatest religion ever. Why? Because you had human beings now capable of wielding the powers of the gods like that, literally. And what would it mean for humanity to face this? Amazing, overwhelming. And what did it mean for those people? Now I'll come to the story of it. So the guy we interviewed, okay, but let's complete this part. So what mother did, she said, if you do this, it will lead to that, but we have to postpone the short-term benefit for the long-term. This would create an overmental manifestation which would even delay the supramental manifestation. And so mother says she went back and in 2 hours she dissolved the whole formation. All the links she had built up over 2 years, she went in and dissolved it. Now imagine what an extraordinary power she had. That she could summon the gods into herself and imprint them directly into an human being and build that without your being in anywhere near the competence required. Just requiring that basic surrender. That's what she is capable of today. Okay? She built it in each of them and then she just goes and dissolves the whole thing. And the connections are released. And in each of these people, suddenly now the power that they were experiencing, the experiences they had began to just diffuse, fizzle out. And they were experiencing their normal humanity. So some of them got upset. So the guy we interviewed was one of those. Now you see, this is what happens when you have the unregenerate humanity onto which you imprint this higher possibility. The guy told us, for the rest of his life, he was against the mother, living in the ashram. And I think we interviewed him in early 90s or late 80s. And he tells us, you know, I was getting such great powers, the mother became jealous of me. So she removed the power from me. Amazing. I don't know what exactly he had, which aspect it was, but the mother removed it. She became jealous, so she removed it. And she was jealous of my capacity. And I'm thinking, and we're talking to the guy, and you can see his mind is so undeveloped, so immature in that sense. But obviously he had something that they allowed him to come into the ashram. There was some base on which they could build. But this is what happens when your basic spiritual foundation is not clear enough and the power can be given, but then the ego can seize and distort it. And had this framework gone on, this is very likely what would have happened. Although it may have assisted the descent of the supermind, these embodiments of the overmental gods might have said, no, but we would rather have our way, our world, our rule. Delaying further that. Or humanity would have seen, this is what we want, we don't want that. And humanity would have supported rather this aspect and not the other. So Sri Aurobindo's statement to the mother was, you must be willing to postpone the short-term benefits in order to get to the long-term realization. The supramental manifestation is what we have to aim at. And after this dissolution, the entire work was done directly in relation to the supermind, bypassing the gods, without their active support, which is what made the whole process that much more difficult and long. Even then, the whole point had been reached in 1938, 37-38, that was the transition point, where the supramental world was literally as if on the edge of manifestation. And again, we had these interviews from people who were alive then. They said you could feel it in the air. You could feel something extraordinary imminent. And there was this sense of delight and new world, new possibilities. And the mother says it was about to happen, it was very close. And that's when the Second World War started. The mother explained it thus. She said the opposing Asuric forces provoked that war in order to distract Sri Aurobindo from this work. Now we have to really see what it means in terms of the evolution. When the avatar is here creating this new world, bringing it, establishing it on earth, and he has the power to protect from the Asuric forces. What do? They go and attack something else which is vulnerable, that he is not able to protect directly. And they created that whole Second World War situation, that in order to protect humanity, Sri Aurobindo had to divert his attention. The result was that immediate objective was delayed. Meanwhile, the refugees came. And the refugees coming brought the huge dilution in the atmosphere of the ashram. That, let's say, container which had been built up was now no more possible. The intensity and the purity that it held was no more possible. It was mixed in with all these families coming in and all the vibes they brought in large numbers. And so that whole effort was basically postponed. And the only way to complete the process of bringing down the supramental was for one of them to take a position on the other side, for the mother and Sri Aurobindo to form the link. And that's when Sri Aurobindo made the choice.
Two things that have always stood out for me. One, that Mother could give the whole thing up, just like that, because Sri Aurobindo said that.
Yes.
And the second is that that there were great beings here whom we've had the privilege to meet. Nolini, Pavitra, Amrita. Are they working for us now in that way?
You know, many of them were exceptional beings in human history. We have spoken of it on one of the earlier things. They were often characters in historical events in human evolution, and all of them were brought here into this space for this purpose. And mostly people of that order don't incarnate very quickly. There's always a longer gap in incarnation. And second is, for what purpose? So everybody came at the time of the avatar for the purpose of participating in the transition. And when that process has now taken a different form, or there has been a postponement, it's a choice for each being. Would you choose to enter the present when there is now the decline and the confusion? Or will you assist from the other side and then come in when things are clear? And that depends on each one. According to the soul's inclination, some more heroic types will say, well, I'm going to get in even in this darkened patch and do what I can. And others will say, well, I'll wait and work from this side where I can be of more use. And that's how it is. You know,
you spoke about Llewellyn's talk. I don't think you really finished everything he had to say. Can you share a little bit more?
I think that vision which he described was to show him the condition of the spiritual aspiration in the United States. And the definition, as I said, was people who are dedicated to the divine only for the sake of the divine. That is all that you see as a point of light when you see from above. Everybody else, because people ask, well, there's such a large religious belt within America, in the center, but that's where the largest darkness was there. So the religious turn and even the worship of God, or even the idea of committing yourself to serving the church which represents God, or whatever form it may be, in itself has very little spiritual value from that perspective, from above. And that giving yourself for the sake of the divine, exclusively for the divine and not for yourself or for any other purpose, those numbers are very few.
You mentioned something to me about, and maybe it's not for discussion, but about the light going out.
Yes. It's something which he has spoken of more and more openly. In the work that he was given, he said it was particularly for America. In the early 2000s, let's say 2002, 2003, 2004, there was an opportunity for an awakening, and he actually went around all over the states meeting people from different traditions to bring them together on a common platform to help awaken the spirituality across the country. And the effort lasted about 3 years, and somehow it did not work, and there was not enough support or interest, and the whole thing fizzled out. It's interesting, that's around the time also when the pushback took place from the other side with the 9/11 attacks and the US invasion of the Middle East, which entrenched the Cabal further because they passed a series of laws. I don't know if you're aware, to this day the United States is a country at war in a state of emergency because of war. It was an executive order passed by George Bush 2001 after 9/11, along with a series of orders which took away the rights of citizens in the US, which gave the US government self-appointed rights to arrest anybody across the world, and rendition they call it. You can go out there, arrest them and pick them up and bring them by plane to the US. And all of these things which would never have passed in a normal open society were done in that moment of stress just after 9/11 attack, when people were shocked and said, okay, anything for the security. That was all, and everything changed at that point. The Cabal entrenched itself in depth from that point on. And what you can see is that opportunity which was there for the light was also facing huge pushback, and subsequently Llewellyn's experience was that opportunity passed, and he would see the clouds on the horizon approaching. Now, my interaction with him took place, I think, on this topic in 2010. And he asked just casually, he asked me, how are things in your community? And I said, well, we are going through certain situations, we have some problems, and there's been a kind of an invasion of certain energies which are creating the confusion. And I just said, I don't know if it's specific to our community or it's part of something larger in the world. And then he said, no, that's very interesting. And he said, I used to see the clouds on the horizon, and I find them now entering everywhere and trying to suffocate all the points of light. And this was 2010. And it matched with a certain experience I had. I can share this here, it's not something nice, but I was reading a text. It was a book by Noam Chomsky, which describes how the deep state is playing through the media and other means. And entering it, I was feeling this thing. I found the pattern, it's working everywhere, the darkness. And I said, well, what's behind it? And I tried to touch what was behind. And I sensed something, and then it was time for me to take I was sleepy, it was time to take an afternoon nap. I went to sleep. And because I had begun that process to feel, somewhere in that sleep state, I experienced the darkness. I woke up with that experience. And it was something so overwhelming. It was so powerful. It was something so deep, pitch black, and so powerful it would stop at nothing. I was so overwhelmed, I just began to weep and weep and weep. But I saw it. And then I realized what its power is. And that's why it has been a struggle. That's why it has been a battle for the divine also. Otherwise, things would have just unfolded smoothly over thousands of years that you have had the divine incarnating, working through so many spiritual movements and awakenings. No, it's not so simple, because the other side is humongously powerful. It is also a cosmic force in a sense. And these are the asuras that Mother had to fight and overcome and defeat. And that's the scope of the battle. And that glimpse gave me a sense of what it was. And then Llewellyn said that he saw the light, he saw the darkness entering, and the points of light being attempted to be extinguished. And at some point, a few years down, 2012 or so, 2013, he said he saw that the darkness was suffocating the light of the earth. Now, he was very careful about what he was saying. He explained that it was a special light given to the earth for the nourishment of the collective evolution of humanity. And that light he saw going out, being extinguished by the darkness. The practical result, he said, was, of course, spiritually each one can grow, but that collective movement of awakening that had been, at least momentarily blocked or postponed, we do not know. At the same time, he had this other experience which he has narrated, which is also he has put on his website. He saw this huge wall formed of bricks, so to say, formed of bricks of human mind, of human conceptions, human prejudices and rigidities, blocking, and crossing the wall on the other side was this stupendous light waiting to manifest. And what was stopping it was this wall. And then his question was, how does one remove the wall? Because it was so rigid, so hard, so entrenched, and he couldn't do it. And so he asked me, did Sri Aurobindo or the mother say anything about this? So I sent him some of the quotations from the mother, what she describes of the nature of the transition, and then one of the comments he made to me, he said, I always thought that the humanity would all wake up in one collective awakening, but I find rather there's a division taking place. And he was very disturbed about it. So again he asked, has the mother said anything about it? So I sent him the text from the agenda where she speaks of this exactly, the 60s. She says, a part of humanity will move into the higher consciousness, and the part that refuses to grow will subside even in the intellectual consciousness and fall lower than what it is. And there will be a gap. And this split is what the mother foresaw. As it happened with the ape consciousness when humanity emerged out of it, there was a part that branched out and the rest had been pushed up, and then it subsided because the impetus in nature falls after a point. So I sent him that, and he said, this is extraordinary, because he said, the only place I have found confirmation from my experiences are from the text of the mother and Sri Aurobindo. I trust his experiences because of the base of his realization and the maturity and mastery that he has of those domains. And so whatever he has described, I have found confirmation for by other means, and I have found to be extremely valuable. But yes, these are descriptions which are not comfortable for people. People get upset. They don't like to face the fact that there is this huge decline of the civilization taking place. And we discussed it earlier, but recognize it very simply by looking at the state of music, art, literature, and you can say cinema and theatre. Is it rising or is it falling in terms of consciousness? Because these are the spaces of collective sharing and collective nourishment, basically. And if the collective sharing and nourishment is declining, well, you have to face the fact that it is. Doesn't mean it has to stay. Doesn't mean it has to continue. It can be changed, and that's our work. But if you don't face the fact that it's happening, then you will live in a kind of a disconnected fool's paradise and be unable to act the way it's required and to the extent that is required, waiting for things to happen. I want to conclude with this very important idea. You will see everywhere in the New Age space, there are channelings of people saying very nice things. Oh, now indigo children are coming, now there will be a change in the DNA. A lot of it is fantasy, but still, it's hope-giving. But the catch is this. Always they will say, it's going to happen. First they said in the year 2000. Then they said 2012. Then they said 2020. Now they're saying 2030. It's going to happen because Earth will enter a galactic sphere and there will be these rays from the center of the galaxy and it will happen. Or someone else says, oh, because there's this blue light coming from some higher beings and they are doing this and it will happen. Oh, there's this group of 12 gods who are going to do this and it's going to happen. What are they telling you? It's going to happen, hang on. And the message basically is wait, you have to do nothing, it will happen. And the result is, all the followers of those channelings are saying, okay, it's going to happen on 2012. We will all be ascended into higher consciousness. So wait, you do nothing. And that's the best way to delay. That's the best way to ensure failure of the evolution. Whereas the message of the mother and Sri Aurobindo was now, you have to act now, change your consciousness. The fate of the earth depends on your evolution of consciousness. It's not going to happen on some fixed date. It's not going to happen because of rays from the galaxy or some planets. They are not spiritual energies. It is your change of consciousness which is what will create the change in the circumstances. And so the message for us is an urgency for our spiritual evolution. And the change always begins on an individual level. No collectivity can evolve if the individuals don't evolve. So wherever we are, if you do not see individuals evolving, you can be sure things are going to collapse. And if you don't want that collapse, well, then you have to start with yourself. And then to the extent that within you, that consciousness is sufficiently developed that it begins to radiate into your environment, well, you will be impacting the larger community also. But if you don't begin with yourself, all the social work of change you do is not going to help. Connecting this to our earlier discussion about propagating these ideas, that you have to do. Even if you don't have the spiritual experience of it, that experience which Sri Aurobindo has articulated has to be shared with others. These ideas have to be planted everywhere, and that we can do. It's not a propagation of ourselves, it's a propagation of a message. But meanwhile, we have to work upon ourselves for this change.
We have about 20 minutes left,
okay.
And I would like to ask
Yes.
you if you could speak a little bit about global warming and the earth itself and the pain that it is suffering.
I don't know if we discussed this already. Didn't we cover it at some point? I think so. I think yes, we have covered.
Did we do that?
I spoke also about the global dimming that is taking place since 1956 and the change in weather patterns that Mother spoke of. Yes. So,
I'm more concerned with the despoilation of the earth itself.
yes. You see, that is another game that the Cabal has played on human thought and effort, misdirecting our attention and effort to something which is of no consequence, practically. You see, when people talk about global warming or now climate change, what are they telling you? Sea levels will rise 50 centimeters after 50 years or 100 years. So I was at the UN Climate Summit, and there was this discussion, intergovernmental meeting, okay? So we went and spent time there. One by one, the person calls out Morocco, India, Germany, and each representative says, "Sir, we have gone through the document and we have not had enough time to study. We need some more time to study. But we are concerned about why you have put quotation marks around these words. And shouldn't there be a comma here?" What? Wordsmithing. Coming out with a statement. And what does the statement hold? The lowest common denominator that the interests, government interests, political interests, economic interests, industry interests are willing to compromise to in a shared decision. And if you put 200 countries with their lowest common denominator, you will have nothing. And so they are wordsmithing with commas and quotation marks. Okay, we go to a different meeting which is discussing the destruction of the ocean, climate, etc. So hoping for something meaningful. And the chairman of the group says, now that there's going to be sea level rising, we have to protect tourist assets on the beaches. Protect tourist assets on the beaches. Not about plant life, not about human life, not about ocean life. Tourist assets which need to be protected. And that was the theme of the whole discussion. It's amazing. And why is all this being given so much importance? Because it is of no consequence. If sea level rises in 50 years, what happens to people as the water rises? They migrate. They go away. Nobody dies because of that. Okay, a few islands will submerge, but they will migrate. But what is happening meanwhile, which they don't talk about, is the immediate poisoning of the air, of the water, of the soil, and the complete collapse of the life systems and the microbiome of the soil itself, which means you will not be able to grow food. The food you grow will be poisoned, and the increase of diseases which are happening, and the flowers are not pollinating because already the system of pollination has collapsed. Nobody is talking about it. And this is the great diversion that is created. Meanwhile, what do they do with carbon increase? You're treating carbon dioxide as a poison. So we have film stars coming out with public statements. We are poisoning the atmosphere with carbon dioxide. No, sir, it's not a poison. It's what we breathe out, which plants breathe in, and it's one of the life-giving, nourishing substances. And the balance of carbon dioxide and oxygen is an ongoing exchange taking place all the time. It's not a poison. You're not talking about the poison, and the thing which is healthy, you're calling poison. And the whole value system has been reversed. Meanwhile, what do? They tax you. They tax you for carbon tax. So now every produce in the world is being taxed with the carbon tax. Who's benefiting from the carbon tax? The people at the top. Who's losing? Common man. All prices go up. For what? Hot air. Carbon dioxide, which is not a poison. Meanwhile, you're poisoning the people at the ground level and nobody's talking about it. So there was a news item a few months ago in the newspapers in India. Headline says, cancer rates have doubled in the last 10 years in India. And the subtitle was, the result of hereditary trends. Hereditary trends leading to cancer rate doubling in 10 years, impossible. It's because of the poisoning in the food. But they can't tell you that, because then you will go on a revolt to those who poison your food. But by saying it is hereditary, the common man who does not think says, yes, okay, what do we do? Well, spend more money to get treatment. Accept it as normal. That's your heredity. You can do nothing about it. So there's a huge diversion taking place in the public dialogue. Nobody's talking about the real thing. And the real problem is the destruction of life, not environment, life. Environment is an expression of life. And when you tilt the balance, life cannot regenerate. It starts breaking down completely. And this is what we should be talking about, and this is what we should be reversing. So when, again, linking it to the mothers, we asked Iman Bhai how he started Gloria Farm. So he said he used to bring every day, because he was involved in purchasing the vegetables and foods for the ashram. And for the mother, he would prepare a certain juice every day. And one day when he took the juice, she drank and she felt it. She said to him, can you not bring me food which is not poisoned? And so he said, okay, that got me thinking, and I started this organic farming in Gloria Farm. He bought the land, etc. Now imagine this is what she had to say, because the poisoning had started with the Green Revolution in the 60s, in India at least. And with it came all the pesticides which you were dumping, and it was coming in the food, and she could taste it. And she could feel the effect on her body. And so she seeded these key corrections right then. We have not done it even now. I don't know if Gloria Farm is still organic, but all the rest of the ashram farms are still not organic. But if you just saw that one suggestion that she made, by now we should have been the pioneers of organic agriculture. Auroville has some of the farms which have moved now completely to organic, but still not entirely organic.
Can end with the meditation.
Yes, surely. In conclusion, though, to give the whole thing a positive turn, remember what the mother did with the sadhaks in the ashram, that she could bring down these overmental gods, incarnate them literally. What did she need to do for that? What was the requirement? It didn't need intelligence. That guy didn't have intelligence, the guy we interviewed. He even had arrogance in a kind. It needed only that you open yourself to her. But you hold that state of relationship, of openness, and submit to, without prejudice, without expectation, without demand, to her force and her action of light. And to remove from yourself the things which oppose the light. Minimum requirement. Otherwise, of course, there is no question of a spiritual life. But even today, she can do that and is doing that to the extent that we offer ourselves. And so for us, this is the important thing to take back. Whatever may be the circumstances out there is the divine help given to you personally for your evolution, for your growth. And there is the action of the supramental consciousness working in spite of these circumstances, working even using these opposing circumstances to ensure the future that is inevitable. If we take the experience of Llewellyn of the light which is waiting to manifest, it's what he was seeing, the new world, the new consciousness. It is overwhelming light. And just this barrier which blocks it is the human created institutions and mental prejudices which are opposing and preventing it. And so to the extent that we accept to free ourselves from those things and take the few steps needed, we create in the wall those little chinks through which the light can begin to come, in us individually and in us collectively. And that's what we are here for. This life is given for this purpose. One of the things the mother said to the children in the ashram and the sadhaks in the school, in the playground, she said that, you were all promised that when the time came for the realization, you would be given a chance. And she said, you don't remember, but I remember. And that's why you're here. But then she explained, this is one of those lives where it is worth it to leave aside everything else for this opportunity which is given. And this is a very important idea. If you think about it, if you could somehow actually recall all of the past incarnations, consider how many thousands or perhaps millions of times you were born, you were educated, you had a family, you had children, maybe you had grandchildren, or you fought, or you studied, or you created a business, or something, and you died, and you took birth again, and again, and again. How many times have you done it? And is it worth it to repeat that whole cycle in this life? If only you could remember, you would realize, I've done it so many times. Why am I craving for these things? What is it that you can do now which you could never do before, and perhaps you may not have a similar opportunity later? Is this the new consciousness, the new world, which is waiting just behind this barrier, waiting to manifest? And all that it requires from us is to commit ourselves and open in consciousness, build the work to build the base. The rest, she builds on it. You build the base, she will create the rest with your acceptance, of course, and the purity which you have to hold, with your commitment. But all the rest will follow through inevitably. And it is worth it to dedicate this life entirely to this one purpose. Yes, we have strong pulls and pushes in our nature. Our nature is not simple. Well, give those pulls and pushes their due. But recognize that they are not central. They are not important enough for you to lose this focus. Your focus should be this. And pamper to all the rest. Doesn't matter. Keep this. And this is important for each one of us who feels called to recognize this opportunity. We have to make this conscious choice. It does not mean denial. It does not mean asceticism. And whatever attachments or desires you have, you do not have to give them up in that sense. Pander to them, but do not make them the focus. Only as much as they need so that they don't interfere with your focus, which is this. And the time is now. There is no other time. Yes. In one conversation the mother had with the disciples, it was narrated to us by somebody we had interviewed in that time in the late 80s, early 90s. And he was part of a group of children that the mother was talking with, and she said, which is your most important moment in life? And somebody says, oh mother, when I first saw you. Somebody said, when I first read a book from Sri Aurobindo. When I first woke up to the fact that there is the divine. Some various answers. And then she said, no, you're all wrong. The most important moment of your life is now. And she said, the past is gone, the future is yet to form. Now is the time when you can act and you can take those necessary steps to move to the future. And so it's now. And there is no other opportunity among all the lives we have had, and possibly for the lives later, because once the transition is made, you will not have the same push of evolutionary force and nature to assist you in that breakthrough.